good day wherever you may be. I am Yahowah. We're here with Kirk and with Scott. How are you guys?
Great. Terrific. Thank you.
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks.
Good. We're going to begin a very different journey today. We have thus far covered the first three chapters, one chapter twice, which would be the opening chapter of Observations for Our Time. And in these first three chapters, now as we begin the fourth here, just by way of summation, Proverbs 6 is where we began. And in Proverbs 6, God explained why it was so essential to hate. And it's probably the best perspective under which we could begin being observant in our time. Because today the prevailing message that is given to the world, that is proclaimed in every university in the West, that is proclaimed by everyone in the media without fail, and that is announced by virtually every politician, that being hateful is the worst thing a person can be. And God takes umbrage with that. He says, no, it's extremely important to hate. Because we ought to hate things like rape and rapists, pedophilia and pedophiles, mass murder and mass murderers. We ought to hate those who engage in the slave trade. We ought to despise terrorists. God does. And the thing that God hates the most is those who lie when speaking of who he is and what he's offering. That would be the religious individuals. And he goes through and he explains what it is that he hates, calling 6 of the 7 things on his list, actually all 7 an abomination, and 6 of the 7 things that he literally despises. And as we go through it, the only institutions that meet the criterion that he laid out were religions and political schemes. And that specifically only one individual, and he speaks of a specific individual that he hates, only one individual meets the profile that is presented in Proverbs 6. That's Shaul, the man who became known as Paul, the author of half the Christian New Testament, truly the founder of the Christian religion. Now we move from there to a universal condemnation of religion. That's found in the first book of Samuel. It was originally written as one book, but what we now call the 7th chapter, where God provides not only an indictment against religion, but also a encouragement, saying that for those who forego and who disassociate from everything that is religious in nature, that for them is his promise to protect them. Moving on to the 3rd chapter, we began to review what God had to say about human governance, about political schemes. And it is amazing how indicting God is of them. And it's important to know because in places like Israel and Israel, religion and politics are melded together as if they were one. That has been the case in the United States for most of its existence, and it still is to a large degree. And of course, in the Islamic world, there is no difference between the government and the religion. They are one and the same. And so what God says is that religious leaders defraud their citizenry. The first thing that they will do is they will take their sons, they will craft weapons of war, and then they will deploy them. And then it says they will tax the people and rob the people of everything they hold dear. It is precisely what we witness in the entitlement, socialistic nature of government as we see it today, and it is no different really than the fascist feudal system that we saw play out throughout the influence of Roman Catholicism in Europe and in every Islamic country today. So with those 3 stories behind us, I wanted to present an accounting of of not just where God wants us to be, but how he is willing, because it's, this expose that we're on, Observations for Our Time, has God universally in opposition to the two most pervasive of human establishments. Almost everyone is aligned with either a religious institution or a political one. Most people both. And so there would be a lot of consternation amongst most people to walk away from both religion and politics, to disassociate from them, and actually to be adverse to them. And so before we moved into the 5th chapter, which is now complete, and we will present it before too very long, the 5th chapter continues in the Proverbs, going to the 5th proverb, the 6th proverb. I'm going to get this right here in a moment. I'm sure my value to this program is every bit as much as I'm paid to participate in it. It is the 7th proverb, the opening chapter of Observations for Our Time, chronicles what God had to say in the 6th. The 7th is a continuation of it, and that is where we're going to head after we consider the 91st Psalm. And we've taken this detour to the 91st Psalm for two reasons. One is very personal for me. This is the one place where, after having written, I think it's now 7,000 pages of material, I get personal. I'm going to, in just a moment, tell my own personal story, because Psalm 91 is intensely personal to me. But that personal story should also resonate with everyone who is listening, because just as Psalm 91 was written for me, it was also written for you. And in it, God pledges to do a number of things on behalf of those individuals who are willing to engage, to expose and condemn religion and politics. Now, here is Psalm 91, and I just want to put this in context. Where we're going next is we're going to return to God's assault against religion. The 7th proverb not only shows how the adversary, Satan, in the guise of a whore, a prostitute, has used religion to lure the ignorant and the irrational, the easily manipulated, to the beauty of his religious institutions. It specifically associates Shaul, the founder of the Christian religion, with this whore. So to prepare everyone so that they are willing to engage in this battle and to speak against, talk about the consternation, the public humiliation, the personal attacks that accompany someone who does what God does and says that Paul, the author of half the Christian New Testament, was in fact demon-possessed. That he was insane, that he was a complete and utter fraud, that he was a false apostle, and that he was not a prophet, that he not only didn't speak for God, he spoke against God. Now, if you turn back the clock, this all began for me when 19 Muslims flew planes into the World Trade Center, buildings that I had been on the top floor of the World Trade Center. I had been asked to give a keynote speech to a large gathering of businessmen and women on the top floor of the World Trade Center. I knew the buildings well. They flew planes, two into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, and they flew another into the Pentagon. And these 19 men who had hijacked one other plane, trying to act as suicide bombers to fly that into the Capitol, but they were stopped from doing so. Screaming Allahu Akbar killed 3,000 people. And so I, like all Americans, was wondering, what in the world happened? Who did this and why? Well, let me tell this story so that you have a sense of context and place, and you'll understand how I came to write not only Tea with Terrorists and Prophet of Doom, but Yada Yah, Introduction to God, Questioning Paul, and now Observations for Our Time. According to God, political and religious institutions are counterproductive, consistently failing to deliver on their promises of security and salvation, much less well-being and prosperity. But what is the alternative? What is Yahowah offering those who reject man's propositions? Where does God's advice and guidance actually lead? What is the right way? In what seems like a lifetime ago, although it was just a fraction of that at 15 years, God answered this question for me. And for the first time, I'm going to share his response with those of you who may be interested. I didn't actually know Yahowah when this occurred. But that was only from my limited perspective, stuck as I was in the ordinary flow of time. Akin to light and in the seventh dimension, Yahowah is able to witness all time at any time in the three-dimensional realm he created for us. So he knew how I would respond to his introduction. Having seen my future, he realized that I wouldn't be satisfied with a brief exchange or a snippet from the lyrics. David, whom I now know as Dode, meaning beloved, was inspired to write for this particular occasion. More importantly, God knew that I would invest the time required to know him, that I'd relationally consider the evidence which he had provided on our behalf, and that I'd be willing to go where his words led, even if everything I believed was torn asunder by them. Fellows, I think that is the single most important and difficult aspect, maybe aspects of all of this for most people. Are you willing to invest the time, and are you willing to go where the words lead? And you would think that more people would be willing to do both, particularly when it's obvious that our world's coming to a screeching halt, that it's deteriorating at an extraordinarily rapid pace. I don't care which country you're in, whether it's Europe and you're inundated now with millions of Muslims in bankrupt countries, or you're in the United States. And I mean, can you imagine thinking that there's hope with a gaggle of clowns that are running for president of the United States?
You can't even, the seas are just about dead.
I don't even think I can lie to myself and believe there's hope.
No. Everybody knows it's a problem.
Yeah, we have done almost everything we can to destroy this planet. We've polluted it. We've covered it in blood. We have lied to everyone. Almost everything that almost anybody in any position of power is doing is now deceitful and counterproductive. The world's coming to a crashing halt, and it's really going to be ugly over the next 15 years. So, you would think more people would be interested in a way out, in hope. And, you know, they can't find it in religion, because if you actually spend any time thinking about what the religious texts say, it's laughable. I mean, it's absolutely impossible that the Quran is true. It's a pathetic hoax, horribly written, as are all of Paul's letters in the Christian New Testament. They are so obviously fraudulent that if you spend any time and you go where the words lead, you're going to abandon religious faith. If you listen to any politician and then you witness what they have actually done, you'll realize they're totally and completely hypocrites. Not worth your allegiance, your vote, your money, your trust. So you'd think people would be spending some time right now if the creator of the universe actually proved his existence, demonstrated that he authored the Torah, prophets, and Psalms for your consideration, and was providing an answer. You'd think you would at least invest the time to consider what he had to say.
Gosh, that could be the most important thing in your life.
You would think so. And you would think that even if, maybe even especially if, God's testimony differed from what you had been led to believe, that given the choice between one or the other, since you can never have both, they're in absolute conflict with each other, religion and the relationship God has envisioned for us, that you choose God over man. I mean, how smart do you have to be to know that God knows a little bit more than does man? God's a little better than is man. God's considerably more trustworthy than is man. Why wouldn't you go where his testimony leads, even if it leads you away from religion?
Strange.
Yeah. One September day, the 18th of September in 2001. I didn't know it at the time, but it was Teruah. The year was 5968 Yah. The set-apart spirit approached me, and I heard God's voice resonating, asking, but not demanding, if I would be willing to engage in an admittedly dangerous mission that would garner enormous animosity. This was not some sort of distinguishing honor, mind you. It was not some kind of reward or even an acknowledgement that I was somehow qualified to do something others couldn't. It was simply that no one else was willing. And truth be known, I wasn't either. The mission was to fulfill the purpose of Teruah, to shout out a warning, sounding the alarm that Islam was deceitful, that it was destructive, that it was deadly, and most assuredly, demonic and damning. Those who had done so before, just nibbling around the edges of the world's second most popular religion, but without Yahowah's involvement, had become marked men, living under aliases and hiding, many hunted down and many killed. Under the circumstances and recognizing that I wasn't qualified, I did something very few people would even consider. I negotiated with God. At the time, I had an aversion to authority. I still do. And as I shared, I didn't know Yahowah. So while I was cautious and concerned, I wasn't the least bit intimidated by God, and most certainly not by Muslims. I told the voice that was well enough inside me that I would engage so long as the following three conditions were acceptable. First, he was qualified and I was not. Since he knew exactly what he wanted the world to hear and I did not, we would have to work together. I would not do any of this alone, reliant on my own abilities. Second, as an assurance that I would never retreat into my comfort zone, which was marketing, I insisted that God accept full responsibility for doing the one thing I felt I could achieve independently. So long as I was willing to talk to anyone at any time, he would promote the message by arranging the interviews. And third, since Muslims had a propensity to terrorize anyone who dared explain the reasons behind Islamic terrorism, I asked Yahowah to protect my family, making my home a safe sanctuary. Well, I did not know his name at the time. Yahowah agreed, saying that he'd have it no other way. After all, he wanted to do what I asked to have done. Now, that's a lesson learned. Then, as confirmation, he asked me to read the note that was in my right-hand pocket. It was a copy of the 91st Psalm. Its promises filled me with a level of confidence and courage I had never before experienced. Within weeks of that time, I found myself on the West Bank, in a subterranean room surrounded by Islamic terrorists. 3 of whom, the previous evening, had murdered 12 Jewish men and children on the road to Emmanuel, having done so equipped with weapons provided by the United States Marines. A pro-military, patriotic American at the time, my world was being rocked, but that was nothing compared to what was to come next. Muslims claiming an affiliation with the world's most infamous terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda, quoted Muhammad and his Quran to justify their acts of terrorism, claiming that their God, Allah, had imposed jihad upon all Muslims as a religious obligation. Could it be true? Had Islam corrupted these terrorists? Had the religion made them mass murderers? Or were the Western politicians and media correct in saying that these isolated individuals were radicals and extremists who had corrupted their religion to justify some of the most heinous acts the world has ever witnessed? The answer was obviously in the Quran and in the words and deeds of Muhammad as they were chronicled in the Hadith. The evidence therein would prove conclusively one way or the other whether these Islamic terrorists had cherry-picked a score of quotations, removing them from their context only to misinterpret each to support their terrorist acts. Was jihad a spiritual struggle, as so many were insisting? Or was Allah demanding armed attacks against defenseless civilians? Could everyone in the public arena be wrong? Was terrorism actually required of Muslims, as these men had insisted? I did the only rational thing. I acquired several translations of the Quran and the earliest, most credible sources of Hadith. I was aghast at the words parading before my eyes. It was all somehow familiar with what appeared to be Bible references, albeit out of context, jumbled and twisted together, in a story so incredulous. I was not only disgusted by it, feeling dirty reading such rubbish, I couldn't help but wonder why so many people believe this immoral, inconsistent, literally insane diatribe was from God. Allah most assuredly bore no resemblance whatsoever to the God whose psalm we are about to read. If Yahowah was God, Allah was the adversary. They were opposites in every respect. One's message was the antithesis of the other. That much was obvious. It was in this way that I was introduced to the ploys of Satan and came to understand the religious strategies he inspires to masquerade as God. And while I do not recommend this approach to knowing God, by process of elimination, it resonated with me. For the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand the actual intent of religion. In the process, I embarked upon a remarkable journey, away from the religious and political myths that I had heretofore used to guide my steps. And along the way, both to satiate my curiosity and to maintain my sanity, I began to consider the testimony of the very God who had spoken to me on Teruah. What did he have to say for himself? The reason I have shared this personal experience is because I thought knowing how the 91st Psalm inspired me to provide some perspective into this relationship I have with God might be useful, and that the insights into the approach that I have used towards his testimony, and therefore to comprise these translations and write the supporting commentary, might also be helpful. But more than that, I hope what follows encourages others to boldly share Yahweh's purpose and plan, while bluntly exposing the institutions which deserve our condemnation. Quite frankly, all relationships are different. And while we all journey down the same path to Yah, we are unique individuals, bringing our own perspectives, attitudes, and experiences, even proclivities and interests to the relationship. This is not a competition. The more, the merrier. If everyone's relationship with Yah turns out to be better than my own, I'm not slighted. In fact, I'm happy for you and for him. And should my interaction with God be appealing to you, in the words which follow, you'll discover how it was conceived and developed, and what it has done for me, and what he has done for me, he'll do for you.
Can I make a comment on that quick?
Sure. In fact, I wrote that right after you sent me a letter.
Yeah. I was going to say those words sound familiar. I talked to you. You know, a relationship with Yah is the same as your relationships with other people. My relationship with Craig is different than Kirk's relationship with Craig. Kirk and Craig are, and you know, I think Larry's the one I use as an example. Larry and Craig have a great relationship. That doesn't change my relationship with Craig. That doesn't belittle my relationship with Craig. That doesn't change my relationship with Craig. It also doesn't change my relationship with Larry or Kurt.
Nope.
And it's
in fact, I would go so far as to say that the fact that I have a great relationship with Kirk and Larry might actually make your relationship with Kirk and Larry better. It might even enhance our relationship that we have friends in common.
Yeah, and the beauty of this is remember where it all started from. Yah only wanted one.
That's right.
He was going to walk with one guy.
He was satisfied with Adam alone.
And it was actually Adam that wanted more. And he said, all right, you know, hey,
I get it.
I can do that. You know, here you go. Now there's two.
And by the way, if I were Adam, I would have wanted the same thing, and I'm glad he wanted it. You know why? I am probably the least intimidated person alive as it relates to God. I still recognize the enormous disparity between the two of us. And if I was all that God had to enjoy and focus upon, I would be so dadgone intimidated, I'm so lacking that I'm not even sure I could handle it. But if I'm sharing God with my friends, and we're all in the same boat together, then I'm really comfortable with it. And the reason, by the way, Scott, that you wrote me those words is that I started this off just as I have shared it today. I said, this is immensely personal with me. The first time I've ever written anything, and I've written what, I don't know how many, between the various volumes of the various books now, it's close to 20 books. And so I think it's 7,000 pages of material. I have always been self-depreciating. I will only introduce myself to say that I am irrelevant, flawed, and that you ought not trust me. I have no qualities that you would should respect in any possible way, that this story is not about me, it's about Yahowah. But with the 91st Psalm, it is about me. Now, it's about you, too, if you choose to claim its promises for yourself, because they were written for you as well as they were written for me. But the 91st Psalm, it is personal.
Well, and I told you when you said that you felt it was a little, you were wondering if you're being too personal. I don't think you can be, especially when it's your relationship. You're not saying that you have to take everything that you're saying and that's the be-all, end-all. You're saying, this is what I see, this is my experience, and then you say, do your own translations. You've never said anything other than that.
This is, the 91st Psalm defines how my relationship with Yahowah began. It defines how we have worked together ever since. It defines our mission together. It defines our relationship. It defines his support. It is wholly and completely explanatory as it relates to my relationship with Yahowah, as it would be yours. It is actually irrelevant whether or not you believe that God spoke to me or used me in this way or not. Quite frankly, the only thing that matters is what God had to say to all of us in his Torah prophets, and psalms. So, accurately presenting his public testimony became my passion, an undertaking which has released a living stream now of 3 million words. For me, this voyage of discovery began in earnest once I came to realize that English Bible translations could not be trusted. Kirk, I know you've done a fair amount of translation here over the last year.
Yes, indeed. I have, to date, I think I have about 20 different reference books, lexicons, interlinearies, and about 5 online that I use just to try to get to the truth.
And do you notice there's a difference between the English translations that are published by religious institutions and what you find when you examine the evidence for yourself?
They're pretty trashy.
They're pretty trashy. Yeah.
He put it nicely. They're not very good.
Yep. Digging into the evidence, I learned that there is a very low correlation. Now, this is I'm using my nice words.
Okay.
I learned there was a very low correlation between what Yahowah said and what the religious establishments have published.
Mm-hmm.
If I wanted to actually know Yahowah, if I wanted to understand what he was offering and expected in return, I would have to search for those answers. I'd have to closely examine and carefully consider his words in the language that he conveyed them.
Mm-hmm.
15 years hence, and having written In the Company of Good and Evil, Tea with Terrorists, Prophet of Doom, and the 7 volumes of Yada Yah, and then Questioning Paul, followed by the 5 books comprising an introduction to God, and having spoken on 5,000 radio programs and interviews, we find ourselves here, now in the 4th chapter of Observations for Our Time, ready to dive into the initial message which initiated the most revealing and enlightening, the most enriching and empowering journey ever undertaken by man. The 91st Mizmor. Mizmor means psalm. It is words or lyrics which are set to music. Attributes the song to Dode. Matter of fact, Kirk, today or yesterday, and most recently, your copy of the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible arrived, and you probably noticed that the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran Scrolls, have an introduction to the psalm that does not exist in the Masoretic text. And it begins that this is a Mizmor of Dode, is how the Dead Sea Scrolls begin. Now, you might say, oh, so what, who cares who authored it, particularly if, in fact, this is divinely inspired, and it most certainly is. The Psalms of Dode are not only consistent with Yahowah's overall nature and approach, his testimony, they are precisely accurate historically in the past, the present, and in the future. Divine inspiration is something that is unarguable as it relates to the Psalms of Dode, the man whose name means beloved.
Beloved, yes.
Yes. Now, there's a reason that I am particularly fond of this, the fact that the Qumran Scrolls, but not the Masoretic text, tells us that this because no one in all of human history, no one was more beloved by Yahowah than Dode. Dode was a man of God. However, or in keeping with that, Dode was not only vehemently opposed to religious, political, and militaristic adversaries, he eloquently revealed how to properly observe Yahowah's Torah teaching. Boy, if there was ever a guy whose testimony and experience you could trust relative to what I was about to engage in, that guy is Dode, David.
He faced them all.
He faced them all. And from exactly the same perspective, with the exact same attitude. Now, as I reviewed the lyrics of this song, I have come to, and the others that he's written, I've come to see Dowd as the most brilliant person in human history. He is the man I've come to appreciate more than any other. Now, just like Dowd, I'm flawed. But also like Dowd, I've come to rely on Yahowah's words to think my way to God. The most interesting aspect of this rascal of a man, besides his enlightening oratory, is that with all of his behavioral failings, he's called righteous by Yahowah. In this way, Dowd's life destroys the myth of Pauline Christianity, which states that the Torah cannot save, but instead condemns. Paul opines that if a person violates a single edict, they are guilty of violating every decree. But Dowd is living proof that it does not matter how many times or in how many ways a person runs afoul of Yahowah's directions, so long as they are right when it comes to the instructions and conditions of the covenant. Rather than condemning a resolutely imperfect man, properly observing the Torah caused a flawed man to be seen as perfect by God.
Hallelujah.
Oh, man, isn't that really the joy of Dowd. Dowd just takes all of the pressure off. Dowd is the guy that says, you know, this Pauline myth that you have to do everything, obey everything that the Torah says, that the Torah is law, and that if you stumble on a single part of it, then you're guilty of violating it all, that is an absolute and outrageous lie. Because Dowd was called Sadak, not guilty, vindicated, upright and perfect, ultimately right with God. And he violated more of God's instructions than he had hair on his head by his own admission. Yeah, and said so.
The 119th.
Yeah, I'm unaware, by the way, of any lesson more important than this one. One which resonates throughout the Mizmor lyrics of Dowd's songs, particularly the 119th, which ascribes 8 insights to each of the 22 Hebrew letters to systematically explain the purpose and benefit of the Torah. The very fact that the 91st Psalm was written by Dowd means that it was inspired by Yahowah. And it means that the intent of the Psalm was to encourage God's children to act like this man, to take a stand against all forms of human corruption. Well, Kirk, that's the end of the introduction. Let's begin with the psalm.
All right.
It begins, He who dwells within the sheltered covering of the Almighty, in the shadow and resulting image of the most extensive and powerful one, he will continue to abide, dwelling for an extended period of time, remaining through the darkness of night. Mizmor, lyrics, Psalm 91:1. Any words in particular that jump out at you, or should we just take them one at a time?
I'll probably take them one at a time. This one is pretty close to the Yes He Scrolls to, I believe. I put a little OK on it. It's a cursory look, but no, let's go through them and we'll see what we can find.
Okay. The first word is a vowel. Not a vowel, a verb. Yesod. It means he who dwells. He, because it was written, it was prefaced with the pronoun he. He who dwells, he who inhabits, he who lives restored, he who approaches and stays and remains, he who settles down and establishes his dwelling, he who camps out after being renewed, he who joins in a marriage covenant. It was penned in the call stem, which establishes a genuine relationship, and it was... And by the way, this general relationship regarding living, which should be interpreted literally, in the participle form, which means that this dwelling was presented as a verbal adjective, whereby the act of dwelling together describes the nature of the experience. And it was in the active voice, which indicates that by approaching and abiding, the person is restored.
And that's what it says and the root is not only a place of dwelling, but it's also a place returned to, or repaired, relationship renewed. So it has all those connotations in there as well. And if you think about the letters, even the letters, I don't want to elongate this thing too much, but the yod and the words from the shin, and then the beth, the home. Right. So he's hitting on all cylinders, which is the most remarkable thing about when you start to translate. My gosh.
Yeah, the Yahowah is 3 letters. The yod is the first letter. It's the hand of God reaching down and out to us. The sh, or the shin, is the next letter. It is the nourishing words of God, and the beth is the 3rd letter, which is the home and family of God. So it's God's outstretched hand and His words that lead to His home and family.
Yeah, He lifts us with His words, right?
Right. Yeah, this is the home that you're invited into, that you're lifted into when you reach up and grab hold of Yahweh's outstretched hand, when you listen to His words. This is the home that they will take you to. Yashab. Within the sheltered covering, Ba Sether. This is in the protected place, carefully concealed and thus hidden from sight. Inside the refuge, the safe harbor or sanctuary, even the garment of the Almighty, El-Yom, of the Most High, from Allah to, and this Allah is the Ain, not the Aleph of the pagan god of the Muslims. Allah means to withdraw, to ascend, and to meet the light, going up to visit the awe-inspiring and gaining status and splendor.
Yeah, bring up high, right?
Yep, so the sheltered covering. So he who dwells within the sheltered covering. Do you know of a place that we're introduced to very early in Yahweh's testimony that is referred to as a protected and sheltered place?
Sure, that's where Adam and Joe were in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, Gan, which is the Hebrew word for garden, actually means enclosed and sheltered place that is conducive to life. Gone. And so within Eden means of tremendous joy. And so this, God is saying, if you want to go to the conditions found at Eden, here, if you dwell in the conditions found in a place akin to Eden, a covered and protected place like Eden, that all of this is available to you. And what did we find in Eden? Because this is really important. Was Eden a religious place?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, no religion.
No politics, no religion, no military.
Yeah, no religion, no police, no justice system.
Everything's free. Everything's wonderful.
Yeah, everything's free. There's no economic system. There are no rulers or hierarchy. There's no political system. There's no military to enforce rules.
No.
There is no projection of earthly or worldly power. No religion, no religious shrines of any kind, no religious language. Perfect. It's just man in a relationship with Yahweh, doing stuff together.
Yeah, not even a boss. I mean, we think of him as boss, and that's fine, like a father, but not a boss.
Yeah.
Certainly not a lord. No one lords over you. Yeah.
So this is the nature of the covering that Yahweh is offering. But there is another aspect of this covering. Yahweh constantly presents the set-apart spirit, which is the maternal aspect of Yahweh's nature, covering us in a garment of light. And that this garment of light, which is comprised of the Torah, makes us appear perfect. Because where there is light, there is no darkness.
That's what's being concealed from view.
Right. So as you look at the context of what's being presented here, this is not only an invitation to dwell in conditions found in Eden, which means to be in a one-on-one personal relationship with Yahweh, completely devoid of any religious or political influences, but also to be covered and sheltered by Yahweh's garment of light. And you read this about this covering that it conceals, and you'd say, wait a minute, God's not about concealing. He is about concealing some things.
Well, our flaws.
Our flaws. And the garment of light conceals our flaws, obliterates them.
And this is
no longer
code.
Yeah, it's no longer.
We have 2 words in his
Oh yeah. We're just a couple of words into it, and Dote's saying, yeah, that works for me. And but it's also a protected place, because if you're going to go off and do what this encourages us to do, which is to overtly attack, criticize religion and politics and militarism, a protected place, a safe harbor. What I was asking for was a sanctuary. That's a pretty good thing.
Right.
Now here, it's the Yahowah is referred to as the Almighty, Elyon, the Mighty One. It is from Allah, meaning to withdraw, to ascend, and to meet the light, going up to visit the awe-inspiring and gaining status and splendor. And the reason that its basis here is important is because the next word means that we're going to be made in the image of the most extensive and powerful one. Bas Sel, in the likeness and resemblance, from Seslim, from the image created by the light in one less dimension, as a result of hovering over and being submerged in the protection. And Salah, successful empowerment and prosperity of the Shaddai, of the most extensive and powerful one, the mighty one, of the most expansive, capable, and influential one, with the ability to cultivate, to nourish, and to bless life. So, do you recall a place we spoke about the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, this protective enclosure? Was there a time where God used this Sel, this T-S-E-L, and Teslim concept to describe something that he created there in
I think we'd go back to the shelter that Noah experienced.
But how about when God said that he created Adam and Yahowah in his image?
Right.
In his image, he created them. Male and female, he created them. Didn't he use image twice? And so God says that he's already created us in his image, albeit in a lesser dimension than he is, at least one lesser dimension than he is. But he now is reaffirming that we're going to be, that he's offering that we will be in his image, which means that, and it's the word that follows speaks of one who is the most extensive, the most powerful, the most capable of nourishing and blessing life.
Right. Well, higher than all others, right?
Right. And the reason that this is important for us is to recognize that we are battling in a world that is, to the best of our understanding, four-dimensional, even though we know there are two things out there that we can't account for that could well be the fifth and sixth dimension. But even in the four-dimensional construct we're in, we're actually stuck in the dimension of time. We can't maneuver in it. And so we're really in a three-dimensional construct that is flowing in one direction as it relates to our perceptions in time. And yet Yahowah is in the seventh dimension.
Right.
And in the seventh dimension, he has created a sixth-dimensional construct that we refer to as the universe. And yet, stuck as we are in the ordinary flow of time in three dimensions, we have a very difficult time appreciating what he's offering. But here he's saying, I'm going to take care of that for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to make you like me. And this covering that I'm providing for you is
Abraham as well, to make it a little clearer each time.
Yes.
Each time he teaches.
Yeah. So in the likeness and resemblance, and the image created by the light in one less dimension as a result of hovering over and being submerged in the protection, the successful empowerment and prosperity of the most extensive and powerful one, Shaddai.
Yeah.
Of the mighty.
But he also gave him the Nesama, which has made him different than anything else on the earth as well. So that made him
gave us
like
the ability to be thoughtful. And it says, so if we dwell, and it doesn't say if, it just says he who dwells within the sheltered covering of the Almighty, in the shadow and resulting image of the most extensive and powerful one, he will continually abide, dwelling for an extended period of time, and remaining through the night.
Yeah.
So this is a promise. If you live within the sheltered covering of the Almighty, if you go to the state found in Eden, unreligious, unpretentious, non-political, non-militaristic, non-patriotic, very simple, relationship directly with Yahowah. If you go to that state and choose to live with him in that state restored, in his sheltered covering of the Almighty, then in the image and resemblance of the most extensive and powerful one, you will continually abide.
Yeah,
he's promising you eternal life. And he's saying it really twofold. You're going to live a long life, as did Dode, as really have I, no matter who your foes are. If your foes are God's foes, you're still going to live a full life. So you're going to continually abide for an extended period of time, remaining during the night. Now, the reason I think that this is not, at this point, a promise of eternal life, I think it because of the fact that the word that he chose to use, loon, speaks of a time of darkness.
Yeah, and we're in that, certainly.
Yeah, so what it's saying is that he lives and lodges on an ongoing basis and thereby endures through the time of darkness. Yeah. He dwells and remains living through the dark hours preceding the arrival of the light.
Yeah.
That's powerful because there are no darker hours than the ones that we're living in and rapidly approaching.
Yeah, and Milan is a place from where we get the loan or loon is the place for spending the night. So it's, totally agreement there.
Yeah, so if you try to remove the concept of night from it, you rob the world of its etymology, the word of its etymology. Now, this was scribed in the very rare Hippoels stem, which expresses the bringing about of a state or a condition, this one living on an ongoing basis, whereby the object, God, enjoys the resulting benefits when the subject, the responder in this case, you and me, act upon and with respect to ourselves, while the Yuktol imperfect conjugation speaks of enfolding results on an ongoing basis with an expression of third-person volition. This all means that if we respond to God, that we will actually influence God in a positive way, and this is precisely what he wants. That God is actually influenced positively by our actions in this regard. It's what God wants us to do, and he's pleased when we do it.
Yes. Sound like a father to me.
Yep. The operative guidance provided by the opening line requires the applicant to approach, to camp out, and to live renewed and fully restored, established within the sheltered covering of the Almighty. If he or she is desirous of the benefit, which is to endure this time of darkness in the likeness and resemblance of the most capable, influential, extensive, and powerful one. In this way, this instruction is similar to the covenant, where the benefits are predicated upon our willingness to accept and act upon its stated terms and conditions.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, exactly.
In fact, the 5 benefits of the covenant, eternal life, perfection, adoption, enrichment, and empowerment, are reflected in this statement, because the recipient of these promises will continually abide in the likeness of the most extensive, capable, and powerful one, being protected by the Almighty. Further, the act which enables these benefits, approaching and camping out with God, living renewed, restored, and established by God, parallels the first three conditions of the covenant: to walk away from Babel, the corruption and confusion of man's religion and politics, to trust and rely upon Yahowah instead of mankind, and to walk to Yahowah and become perfect, which is done by way of his path home. This is the quid pro quo of the opening salvo. However, if we want to understand the subtle nuances of this instructions, we will have to scratch well beneath the surface. So let's begin to even more closely examine and carefully consider the opening clause. This is how we initiate the process. He who dwells, inhabits, and lives restores, and he who approaches and remains, he who settles down and establishes his dwelling, he who camps out after being renewed, he who joins in a marriage covenant, and the sheltered covenant covering within the protected place, which is carefully concealed from sight inside the refuge, the safe haven and safe harbor, the sanctuary, even the garment of the Elyon Almighty, so as to be withdrawn, ascending to meet the light, and going up to visit the awe-inspiring while gaining status and splendor.
You know, in case someone out there is assuming that you're just writing all these, just embellishing, everything you just said there, I did this independent of reading your material on purpose. Mm-hmm. Everything you just said there is exactly what you do if you look up enough words from enough sources.
Yep. So if you look up each, in fact, what you did in this case is long before you even looked at the translations that I'm sharing, you went and used
my own,
you use interlinears and lexicons, dictionaries to look up each word for yourself.
Right. From every source I can find, and a few online, and there's not a misstatement in there that I couldn't prove that this is what it says either in its root or this is what it says from this group or this group, because all translators are not the same. So I'm not a translator in that sense. I just look up words out of a dictionary, but I have so many, and I found if you go to enough sources, that's exactly the way it's said.
One of the things, there is something that is an extrapolation and part of the process, if you will, involved in translation, and we really get into this in the next chapter, because there's a section that reverts to first person in the middle of a story about how the whore of religion entices people, and you're required to say, all right, now who is speaking to us in first person? And I explain that words have a variety of meanings in every language, and particularly so in Hebrew. And it's incumbent upon us to understand who is speaking and to convey their message in a consistent and credible way. And so there is this process of translation that goes beyond merely knowing what the words mean, because many words can have varied meanings, and you need to choose to convey the meanings which are consistent with the nature of the speaker, as he or she has defined themselves, and is consistent with the message that they have conveyed elsewhere.
Yeah, the context and the character of the person speaking, right.
Sure. So when if I look at a word like the to sell, where we're talking about in the image, I need to understand that. I need to understand how Yahowah has used that word relative to our conception elsewhere, so that I can take the aspects of the word, the definition of the word, which apply to this statement. And that's really what the process is all about. So let's look at some of these words again. The verb, yashab, was written using the call stem, which establishes a genuine relationship between the applicant, and those who want to engage in this process, and the Almighty, regarding living, which should be interpreted literally. It was scribed in the participle form, which is thus a verbal adjective whereby the experience of dwelling together is akin to the idea of camping out. It's flavored that way. Also, in the active voice, the applicant, having listened to this instruction and having accepted it as appropriate, then acts by approaching the protective shelter. This verb, yashav, which means to live and dwell together, to camp out together, is used 1,090 times in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. In addition to dwelling and remaining, living and inhabiting, being settled and camping out in a place restored and renewed, it can also convey being seated next to a prominent individual. Gee, I wonder who that might be. It's indicative, of course, of sitting next to God. Yeah. Moreover, based upon its root, Yashav speaks of inheriting something valuable, of inheriting considerable wealth and substance. It is from Yesh and Yarash, to stand up, to stand out, and to exist empowered and enriched as a result of an inheritance given to an heir. Isn't the covenant, right, at its core, an inheritance from God himself?
Right.
Doesn't the covenant empower and enrich us?
Those are the promises.
And to participate in the covenant, don't we need to stand out and stand up against religion and politics, and to stand up and stand out in favor of Yahowah?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Shout, that's true. Shout it out.
Yep. This verb, yashav, reflects the final destination of the mikra, invitation to be called out and to meet with God, a path which leads to sukkah, to camping out with God. The journey home conveys the benefits afforded to the covenant's children. Moving on, the primary meaning of kather is covering, a sheltered place which is hidden from adversarial influences, protect those who seek the safe harbor or the sanctuary. It speaks of how the covenant's children are carefully concealed by a garment, removing from sight those adorned in it. In this way, they are kept close. They are protected from attack. Now, this can be interpreted in two different ways. It suggests that those who seek to be guarded by God and who listen to his instructions regarding his protection receive a concealing garment which serves to hide the applicant in plain sight, in broad daylight, right out in the open, as opposed to slithering around corners and cowering behind walls, hidden in the dark places. Now, that is my personal experience. I wrote Tea with Terrorists and Prophet of Doom.
Where they've been hiding out.
Yeah, under my real name. And I conducted thousands of interviews on them, all under my real name. I never hid. Not once. Not ever. Never ducked for cover. Never so much as flinched. So this is, in fact, my personal experience in this regard. Second, if we act in accordance with the Yahowah's instructions, approaching the Almighty's covering, we will abide with him. Literally, Elyon will be withdrawn by God, ascending to meet the light, going to visit the awe-inspiring while being enriched and empowered by his status and splendor. Yeah, one day on a teruah, God's going to call us home. We're just going to be invisible, vanish in this world. Yahowah's garment of light provides the benefits of the covenant. Since light is timeless, literally eternal, being enveloped in it makes us immortal. Since light eliminates darkness, we're perfected when adorned in it. Since Yahowah is light, we are transformed into energy. When that occurs, we become our Father's children. And since light is empowering, it enriches our lives when we are immersed in it. There's only one covering that enables this result, and only one means to it. This was first presented as an integral part of Pesach and Matzah, leading to Bakorim, where we are invited to answer Yahowah's invitation to come into the presence of the maternal manifestation of the fiery light, so as to be adorned in the set-apart Spirit's garment of light. This Sether Elon, the covering of the Almighty's light, makes us perfect, removing and obliterating all darkness from us, especially from Yahowah's perspective. The covering of God's light protects us from harm by making us immortal children of Yahowah, who is the light, thereby providing the promised benefits of Passover, of unyeasted bread, and of firstborn children. His path home via the mikra is the one we're invited to follow as part of the covenant. whereby we are encouraged to walk away from man's babble, corruptions, choosing instead to trust and rely upon Yahowah, going to him to become perfect. This is accomplished by closely examining and carefully considering the terms and conditions of the covenant relationship and then acting upon them. On the surface, Yahowah is promising to provide a safe haven for those who choose to live under his protection. That promise resonated with me some 15 years ago as I began this mission of exposing and condemning Islam on his behalf. But now, spiritually, it means so much more. Yahowah is promising to provide eternal life, protecting and adopting those who respond to his covenant and who answer his invitations. How about El-Yom, my friend? It was written with the following letters: the Ain, the Lamed, the Yod, the Waw, and the Nun.
Yes, the I. Obviously, it looks like an eye, and then you have a staff, the lamb.
Shepherd's staff.
Then we have of course, a hand reaching down, a yod or yod, depending on the era. Then that is, the next one would be I'm trying to say the stake and
the law.
To increase the family, to enlarge the home, etc., and then the nun, which is obviously the inheritance, what we were just talking about. So we have the nine, we have the watching, and we have the leadership. We have God giving us a helping hand, lifting us up, making us up high. Allah, once again, from the root. And then the wall, of course, he wants us to enlarge, but also the enlargement can be besides just family. It's enlarging us. We're exponential, as you like to say, and you and Roy, when y'all talk about that 10 to times 10 by whatever.
Well, it means to add to increase, but also to protect.
You know, and that's the inheritance. So, gosh, that's a lot in one word.
El-Yon appears 53 times in the Torah, Prophets, and Psalms. Strong suggests that it is rooted in the verb Allah, which is Ain, Lamed, Hay, and thus speaks of being withdrawn, ascending to the light. Well, that's valid, especially in this context. However, there are some other possibilities, and I think it's worth considering them. El, which is written Ain Lamed, as it is here. Ain means, is a preposition. It means upon. And it means almighty as a noun. So Ain Lamed means upon as a preposition, and almighty, God, as a noun. The Yod Waw is the shortened and thus familial version of Yahowah's name. It is found in scores of other Hebrew names and words, such as Yoel, which means Yahowah's God, Yod, which means Yah's witness, Yoreh, Yahowah teaches, Yonathan, Yahowah gives, Yonah, Yah's dove, and Yobel, Yah's lamb, just to name a few. As for the Nun, its depiction as a sperm speaks of children with an inheritance. Therefore, the letters associated with El-Yom convey eyesight, which is in the sight of and from the perspective of. The Lamed, the shepherd's staff, the guidance provided by the shepherds. The Yod, or hand, outstretched and open hand, reaching down and out to us. The Waw, we find that we are secured and enlarged in the protective canopy provided to the sperm, the nun, the children with an inheritance. So as a compound of all Almighty and Yahowah, concluding with the nun, we see Almighty God's children. It's a heck of a word.
Yeah, there's one little aside on the Ain Lamed, which is a word for hide, rejoice, triumph, work, and labor. But its basic meaning, the oldest meaning I could find, is experience, knowledge, and the staff of a leader. But I thought it was interesting that the word for hide in the context of what we were talking about, because it's right next to in the shelter of. So.
Yeah.
And hiding.
Yeah. If I'm going to hide, being protected from the dark nature and violent nature of man's religious, political, and military schemes, I think in Yahowah's mode, in his home, in his light, is probably a pretty good place to do it.
Yeah.
Now here, as we continue to go through these words, now that we know where we should be headed and are clued in regarding how to get there, the beneficial clause presents the desired effect in the shadow and resulting image, in the likeness and resemblance, in the appearance, as a copy of, as a duplicate or doppelganger, created by the light in one less dimension. As a result of hovering over and being submerged in the protection, the successful empowerment and the prosperity of the most extensive and powerful mighty one, the most expansive, capable, and influential one, with the ability to cultivate, nourish, and bless life, he will continually abide. Dwelling for an extended period of time, remaining during the night, he will lodge and live on an ongoing basis and thereby endure through the time of darkness, dwelling and remaining, living through the dark hours preceding the arrival of the light. You know, we've got now just 10 years to the 10 years and change, less than 11, to the beginning of the tribulation, which is going to be a very, very dark time. But that dark time concludes on Yom Kippur, the Day of Reconciliations, and year 6000 Yah, 2033, October 2nd is Yom Kippurim in 2033, when the light returns. So this time of darkness will conclude with the arrival of the light. And it is through this darkness that Yahowah has promised that he would protect us. Now that's particularly comforting when you realize that Ezekiel spoke of, and so did Isaiah, Yahshua, spoke of a menacing war that would be perpetrated by Muslims against Israel. And that the task that I was going to undertake would be to expose and condemn Muslims, Islam. So here, as we discussed earlier, Tessel is a protective shade and shadow. It's an artifact and product of the light. The image which appears in one less dimension than the pattern or object between the light and the shadow. So since the only thing between us and God, which is capable of shaping us more fully into his image, is his Torah, by observing it, we are made to resemble the Word of God. And yet, since Yahowah calls his Torah light, a more accurate and fitting metaphor may be the illumination of the Torah, as it casts on the covenant, creates children in the image of God. Both interpretations are valid.
Yeah.
This perspective on the Tessel is reinforced by the fact that it is from Teslem, to be made in the likeness or semblance of, to be in the image or resemblance of, and thus to appear similar to God. The word implies that Yah achieves this by hovering over us with his spirit while submerging us in his protective presence. This process is reinforced by tas'alal, to submerge, and it is also related to shalak, to advance and to prosper, to make progress towards and success towards reaching a goal, to be treated favorably so as to be empowered overwhelmingly. Similarly, shalak is to become swift and powerful, able to move rapidly, being eminently capable and exceedingly forceful. These aspects of Sel all serve to affirm that we properly construed Sether Elon as a covering of the Almighty's light, and maybe even protecting us from Kirk's fearful dog. God is light. The dog agrees. Nothing provides greater safety. We illuminate our homes and roadways for this very reason. Progress comes from enlightenment. Light as energy is vastly more powerful and energetic than matter, as is demonstrated by Einstein's E equals mc squared. Energy equals matter times the speed of light multiplied against itself. And nothing moves faster than light. Now, with the inclusion of our Nasalma conscience, Yahweh said that he created man in his image, making us similar to God, albeit in fewer dimensions. If Yahweh exists in the seventh dimension, as evidence seems to suggest, then we, as three-dimensional constructs, stuck in the ordinary flow of the dimension of time, will, if we act upon Yah's advice, not only be able to travel expediently through time, our capabilities will be enhanced such that we will better be able to explore and appreciate the universe God created, which I suspect is 6 dimensions, with dark matter representing the attractive nature of relationships and dark energy representing the repulsive potential of free will, of choice. Now, if we get to visit with Yahweh in 7 dimensions, but we are only expanded to 6 dimensions, that's still a really good thing.
Yeah.
Because it's an infinite increase from 3.5 to fully 4 dimensions. Infinite. It's an infinite increase from 4 dimensions to 5. It's an infinite increase from 5 to 6. And I'm here to tell you that when you recognize that as a material being stuck in time, just the multiplicitous effect of E equals mc squared being transitioned to light is extraordinary. I mean, what being light tells you is, number 1, you're immortal, number 2, you're perfect, but number 3, this universe as it presently exists, if we can look 15 billion years in all directions, then it is at least 30 billion light years across. And if it's 30 billion light years across, we cannot visit even the next star in a physical body. But liberated into energy, empowered as energy, then because of the nature of light, where time simply exists, the idea of speed is distance over time. And when time simply is, then speed is irrelevant.
Yeah.
And so is distance to travel. You can be anywhere at any time. And so the whole universe becomes discoverable, explorable, enjoyable. So even just moving from 3 point something to 4 is an extraordinary. I mean, that alone would be more than sufficient for any of us. Mind-blowing in terms of what it does for us. And then it's an infinite increase to 5 and to 6, where we will exist with Yahweh in the 7th. But this is not saying that God's not going to make us 7-dimensional, which is what he is. It's not saying that at all. It just says that in the here and now, to survive this time in darkness, you're going to be, from his perspective, 6-dimensional.
Wow. That's pretty heavy.
Pretty heavy. Now, this Nasalma, which is the thing that made us like God, is important to recognize also, just because it is our ability to reason. Now, let's just talk about the dimensions for a moment. It may be helpful to consider the relationship Walt Disney has with Mickey Mouse. Now, while Mickey Mouse is not a living creature, and while creating something in 2 dimensions is infinitely easier than creating something in 3, 4, 5, or 6 dimensions, Walt Disney has a relationship with Mickey Mouse. The creator of the comic character exists and acts in 3 dimensions, while his creation is confined to 2 dimensions. Mickey, even if he were alive, could not see Walt. Mickey cannot interact with Walt. Mickey cannot even envision the 3-dimensional realm in which his creator exists. However, while Walt can direct Mickey, the artist cannot enter his creation's 2-dimensional realm either.
Great point.
Now, I'm sharing this for a number of reasons. First, the only way Yahweh could have created a 6-dimensional universe is to exist in the 7th dimension. And that means that for us to meet God, to see God, to interact with God, we will have to be infinitely enriched and empowered, ultimately becoming seven-dimensional beings. This is the offer and promise Yahweh is making on behalf of his covenant children. To come into the presence of Yahweh as he is, undiminished, we need to be seven-dimensional. Second, this realization means that Jesus Christ, and I put that in air quotes, even by the correct name, Yahushua, could not be the entirety of God, nor anything remotely resembling that, confirming why he said, the Father is greater than I. The best that God can do, apart from a diminished aspect of himself, to interact with us, the best he can do. He can set apart a diminished aspect of himself to interact with us. Such is the nature of the set-apart spirit, and the most set apart, literally, Yahushua, who is not only set apart from God in terms of a diminished manifestation of God, he has to be further diminished to go from spirit to matter. Yeah. This is why Yahweh provided his Torah. It is the best.
And how much this explains. I mean, yes. It gets your perspective right for probably the first time when I started understanding that. Then I said, oh, gosh, now I understand. Because
perspective is so important.
Yeah.
And I think that the best way to appreciate where we are relative to God, what God created for us, and where he's taking his children is to understand dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And this relationship between Walt Disney and Mickey Mouse, even though it's not near the capacity of the relationship between Yahweh and the created being, the living being of mankind existing in a six-dimensional universe, but able to understand only three, and maneuver in three of those dimensions, we can at least grasp the concepts. Even though I can't even imagine what it would be like to be fully four-dimensional, much less 5, 6, and 7. That sounds cool to me. Want to be there. Looking forward to being there. But it's way beyond anything that I would ever ask for or expect. Third, this empowering transition from physical, material, and nature, stuck in time to light, this increase in dimensional capacity from 3 to 7, is the way Yahweh intends to facilitate the covenant's blessings, perfecting, immortalizing, adopting, enriching, and empowering his children. So while all those who accept the covenant's conditions will eventually receive the full extent of all 5 of these benefits, while we are still in the darkness of this world, Yahweh is simply promising to move us closer to him by enhancing our lives in the 4th dimension, giving us more time to accomplish what he wants done. That's why you should never be in a hurry. Don't be impatient. Yeah, there's a lot to do. You know, I'm just now starting on the 6th chapter, and the 6th chapter of observations for our time. My purpose was that God has expressed his disdain for religion and for politics, and he's associated Shaul Paul with the religion he hates most, Christianity, and condemned him. And he's introduced the whore of religion as the adversary. But I wanted to walk through Yahshua, Isaiah, where God makes this progression between religion, or the people's rebellion equals religion, and how religion equals the adversary, and how the adversary equals the whore, and how the whore is equated with Babylon, and how Babylon is the seat of power and influence of Satan himself. I wanted to make that connection, connecting all those dots, because Yahweh, in the first 14 chapters of Yahshua, does that for us. And you're looking at 14 chapters of Yahshua. That's more than a year's worth of work.
Yeah.
And so you say, oh my goodness, why even embark on making those connections? It'll take you forever. And you just say, no, don't worry about it. You don't have to translate every word or every statement. Just make those connections all the way through. You'll get there. And
but you know, you're going to find that.
Why be in a hurry?
You know, you're going to find some of those same connections, at least I did, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I found a lot of them in this psalm.
Yes.
You know, when you get to lions and serpents and stuff like that, it's pretty obvious who he's talking about.
Pretty obvious who he's talking about. It was pretty obvious who he was talking about in Proverbs 6, which is where we began.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty obvious who he was talking about in the 7th chapter, 3rd verse of the first book of Samuel. Who he was talking about. Pretty obvious that he was what he was talking about in Samuel 1:8, 1 Samuel 1:8. You know, it's pretty obvious all the way through. But I just like the progression in Yahowah. He just goes all the way through our rebellious nature as his children, to religion, to the whore, to the whore being associated with Babylon, and with Babylon being the seat of Satan. Takes you all the way through. That's why the people who were sitting there, you know, I wanted to see if there was directly the whore and Babylon being related, and it is in Yahowah, but not in the same chapter. It's just a progression that you make these connections. And of course, I looked up the whore of Babylon as it's proclaimed in Revelation 17, which is the place I didn't want to go because of the fact we don't have any we don't have any extant material on anything past the 14th chapter of Revelation, so who knows how much it's been altered. It's the testimony was given in Hebrew, but it's been translated to Greek. And the last thing I want to do is become an expert in Greek, and even so, it wasn't communicated in Greek. It was communicated in Hebrew, so there's only so much you can do.
I have a book that's got it translated back into Hebrew, but I don't know if they chose the right words. So,
yeah, I mean,
so you're not a whole lot better off there either. So
I don't think you're better off. Yeah, I don't think you're better off at all.
Do it,
So. You know, that's the challenge of the whole thing. I wouldn't mind, considering somebody's attempt to translate the Greek back into Hebrew, that so long as that individual knows Yahowah, that could be of value. If they don't know Yahowah, it's another religious text.
That's a waste of time,
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
Just repeat the same old lies.
Yeah, so I just thought that the Yahowah was the best way to go about it, because if you read Christian commentary on who is the whore of Babylon, they're clueless. They don't have a clue that the whore of Babylon is Christianity. I mean, specifically it's Roman Catholicism, but the differentiation between Roman Catholicism specifically, which is 1.4 billion Christians, and the remainder Orthodox and Protestants who comprise Christianity is nil.
You know, if you went to an American Christian and said, God mostly talks about the things he hates, he's mostly talking about your government, your religion, your country.
Yeah.
They'll freak on you.
They'll freak on you. But
they just go, get away from me, you crazy person.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
I'm going,
so the point is here that as your transition, as God empowers you and liberates us in time, we just shouldn't be in a hurry. We got all the time in the world. So we are given all the time necessary to do whatever needs to be done.
Well, I need an extra day because you're moving way too fast.
Yeah, here we're not even through the first verse.
This is going to slow you down a little bit, so that's good. That's good. Get your chance on the next one.
Yeah. Now, this brings us to Shaddai. It's a descriptive title Yahowah has chosen to depict an aspect of his nature. While it, like Elohim, is typically rendered almighty, God could not have deployed two remarkably different words to convey exactly the same thought. So as we did with Elohim in connection with Yeshab and Sether, we are now challenged to identify the aspects of Shaddai which explain its use in connection with Luin, abiding through the darkness, and Ba-Tesel, in the image and protective shadow of the author of this proclamation. And as I would encourage everyone to engage in their own study, this is what I discovered. Shaddai means to be extremely powerful and fully capable of completing and fulfilling beneficial promises associated with the blessings and prosperity that one is offering. It is from Shaddai, to expand and to become expansive. It describes one who possesses the ability to cultivate, to nourish, and to bless life. And that's where we'll pick it up on our next program.